Okay, good morning. We're in Hemshech Ayin Beis, page 1155, Aleph Kuf Nun Hey. And we began another subchapter in the theme of the two perspectives, Das Elyon and Das Tachten, Kel Deus Havaya. The two perspectives. And we're talking about one perspective was, we're talking about Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh. So one perspective was how the Yesh, Amiti, looks down at the ayin and reality beneath it, and that is the ayin, complete ayin ve'efes, complete nullification, insignificance, no standing, all the different words I used. And the second perspective, das tachton, is how the yesh hanivra looks up at all of higher levels, and ayin in the context that it's made of a different, it's not of the substance of the yesh, and it's not comprehensible. Omnom, Rebbe Rashab now begins, Omnom, however, from the pasuk that says, Kel Deus Havaya, suggests that this is in godliness itself, that the two perspectives are not just the perspective of the creator and the perspective of the creation. In the divine itself, in the ayin itself, you also have these two perspectives. And we just began touching upon this, which is essentially going to say that the ayin ha'amiti, the ayin that reflects atzmus, also senses its insignificance, its complete, I would say, feelings, what's the word I would use? Complete sense of insignificance when you're talking about compared to atzmus. So that's what he said, these words. That it's in the Elikuz Gufa, Hainu Ba'ayin Atzmei, you have these two days, these two perspectives. And they began to read, and I'll just go over it briefly. The Das Elyon hu ba'er k'meshen nimshach min ha'atzmus. Das Elyon is in the oil that comes from atzmus, not just in atzmus. Shu b'chinas ayin be'etzem husei. It's ayin in its fundamental nature, it does not have identity of its own. This is loyach masha atzmus roya eisei la'ayin. It's not just that the core essence, the atzmus, the source, atzmus sees it as ayin because of its the infinite distance from what a true reality atzmus is. Ki'im sha'er gufa, but rather the er itself, hu b'chinas ayin ba'atzmei, is in a state of ayin on its own. It itself feels that way. I should qualify myself. No, it doesn't say it feels that way. It's in that state because there's no feeling. That's the whole point. That it does not have any sense of standing on its own at all. And it's not just an existence that says I'm bottled. You know, you could say I exist, but I realize through contemplation or through work or through feeling that I am completely nullified in the presence of my source. Here, it initially is in that state. And that's Das Elyon now. That the itself is in that type of, that's its type of, its state. So we have here conceptually the concept of utter bittul. As I said, to understand this better, I said yesterday, you have to think of the contrast. What is something that doesn't have bittul? Something that feels it is its own entity. It feels it's self-contained, self-interest. Everything we know about existence, everything we know in our own consciousness, in our own psyche, is the antithesis to bittul. This doesn't mean we can't have bittul. Doesn't mean we cannot commit ourselves to something and devote ourselves and put aside our interests for the interests of another or interests of God. Of course we can do that. But initially, we are an entity. Our definition of existence is I am, period. I mean, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. You can go even further. Forget about think, even if you don't think. I am, I just am. And that's it. There's an I. It would not be fathomable or conceivable to us that I exist and there's no I. Then I don't exist. So existence by definition is declaring I am here. Now that I am here can be a very selfish and arrogant and even damaging force, and it could be a very humble one. You can be a humble I too. This is not discussing that. But yesh, by definition, yesh amit, yesh anivra, by definition is an I. There's an existence. Oyer is ayin. It doesn't have that concept of existence. So all it is essentially, 1 second. One minute. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So Oyer doesn't have that. That's why the only way to understand it is by contrast. It doesn't have that sense of I. You can't say I, Oyer, exist. So then you say, so what is happening then? What happened? So that's how the way I explained it yesterday, and I'll say it again. Oyer is built in Metzias Nimtza of Atzmus, true absolute reality, putting into place a mechanism of the concept of bittul, of utter bittul, that in the Metzias Nimtza, meaning in existential reality, as we will ultimately emerge from that existential reality, we have now the pure archetype, the pure quintessential bittul. That's not something that's buttul, but that's something that all it is a reflection of its source. So you have basically Oyer is the transference of Atzmus's reality of built in Metzias Nimtza into Metzias Nimtza state. It's not Atzmus, but it's nothing but Atzmus. That's all it is. So it's as much as you can imagine, total and utter and absolute devotion or dedication, but not of an entity that's devoted, of a non-entity. But it's become something that we can talk about. If you talked only about
Atzmus, creation, right? It's a creation from Atzmus.
Isavus, I would say, to be more precise, but okay. Yeah. But when you talk about Atzmus, so you could say, why can't Atzmus convey to us that element of bittul on its own? So first of all, because Atzmus is not bittul. Atzmus is a yesh amiti, it's a true absolute reality. It's not a reality like our reality. It's a non-existential reality. Meaning you can't say it exists like we exist, but you can't say it doesn't exist. So that's number one. Number two, if Atzmus conveyed to us that level of bittul, it would be an asmizdika bittul. It wouldn't be one on our terms. Here, the Oyer, the only thing you can say about it, it's not Atzmus mamish. So it's nothing but Atzmus, but now you have something we can hold on to. There's some handle here that we can say, I understand now the concept of total bittul. So can you point to a human being that has this level of ayin? You could maybe say a Rebbe, you could say someone who has total, but I don't know if that's how we define usually a Rebbe in that way, but you're talking about something that does not have anything but Elikus. On the other hand, it's not Atzmus, obviously. So there you have it. He's going to explain more. So let's continue now. So Kim Sha'er Gufu b'chinas Ayin b'ashen b'chinas Tfisis Mokim b'atzmei klal.
You said a Rebbe.
I would not say necessarily you could say this. Look, it doesn't say anywhere that Ein Sof, Atzmi, that's a level of a Rebbe. What you described yesterday is a different discussion. I wouldn't bring it here, to be honest. Can you explain the idea that a Rebbe is completely bittul? In that sense, you could, but I'd be careful before I apply it there. There's some
I only quote what the Rebbe said. About
the Rebbe didn't quote. Did the Rebbe say there that that's the level of Atzmi and Ayin Beis, page 1155? No, he didn't even cite it. So the Rebbe says the idea. You're one that associated with this, which I want to say is there's similarities, but I would not just say that's this level. That's a big statement. You have to be able to say that with authority. Okay, so fine. Is it an example of bittul? Yes, but there are a lot of examples of bittul.
But Reb Simon, you agree that this needs a Farbrengen. This is not. You cannot dismiss it. I guess
I could dismiss it. 1 second. Since this is not a Farbrengen, we're learning Ayin Beis. I have to qualify that it doesn't say anywhere that this level in Ayin Beis is that sicha. You could talk about it. As I said, there are comparisons, and you can Farbreng about it. But as a teacher in Ayin Beis, I wanted to make it clear that to make that connection is one. It doesn't say it anywhere explicitly. That's all. For all you know, that sicha could be even higher than because it doesn't say in aguf. Atzmi says atzmus in aguf. But I don't want to go there because it's just going to confuse matters. Again, if you want examples of bittul, it's an example of bittul, and there are other examples of bittul. Okay. Look, I'm not even going into the concept where it says Yisrael v'kutshabrichu kul echad. What level is that? Is that atzmi? Is it lower? Is it higher? So point is, let's just learn what it says here. And as I said, examples can be found in many places, but being it's very sensitive matters, I'm being very careful what we can say for sure, what we can't say for sure. That's all. Now he's going to explain how has this dimension. Somebody else wanted to ask something? No? Okay. V'zehu, I'll continue reading. The line begins chulu. It's 6 lines from the top of the chapter. Top of the paragraph, I should say. 5 lines. V'zehu mitzad dveikus ha'er ba'atzmus. This level of bittul, of ayin mamish, what he calls now das elyon, in the ayin amiti, it's due to the dveikus, the attachment of and atzmus, that it's so connected that's why it has that level of such complete bittul. Al kain hu b'chinas ayin be'etzem. So due to this dveikus, that's why this has is ayin be'etzem, complete ayin. Not, as I said, we're going to learn about the different levels of ayin. You can have an ayin, a yesh, that becomes bottle. You could have a level of ayin that's not ayin be'etzem. It's ayin relative. We spoke, for example, in Ayin Beis earlier, the 2 different types of students. They come from the same teacher. One student becomes a great teacher himself, and everybody respects him. When he meets his teacher, he's quiet because he's bottled to his teacher. The teacher is bottled to his teacher. But you don't call that a bittul be'etzem. Why? Because that's like shraga b'tira. That's like a flame in the light of the sun. The flame in a dark room is an absolute reality. It's a flame, it illuminates, it has substance, it has a function. In light of the sun, the flame is insignificant. When this teacher, who is a student of his teacher, standing before his teacher, he's quiet, he's bottled. But that's only because this teacher is present. So they don't call that ayin be'etzem necessarily. There's different levels in that as well. I'm not going to go into it. Then there's someone who's ayin be'etzem, even when he's not in the presence of his teacher, he always feels in completely bittul. Now, I'm not saying that's a better mile, because you can say it's better to be a teacher than to be completely bittul, because the second level, the second person may not be able to even teach, even when his teacher is not present. So it may not always be a quality to be so bottled. But the point I'm making here, the bittul can be relative and it could be fundamental. Here we're talking about ayin be'etzem. It's not due to the fact that it's in the presence of atzmus, it's due to the fact its fundamental level is always connected to atzmus. So there's no such thing as in anything else but atzmus, as he's going to say now. Okay, that's the opening statement about this. Now he's going to say, V'hinei, and now, ayin, this that we just said, that there is in a state of ayin, meaning complete selflessness, no self, no identity, yesh lahavim b'kamei fanim. We can understand this in a number of ways. Be'in habitl. In a number of ways in how we understand what bittul is. So he's going to explain, as I said, 4 different ways to understand the ayin of the bittul. Here is, just to give you the lay of the land, the first way is right here in this page. The second is going to be on page 1157. And on 1158, he's going to talk about the third and the fourth way. And he's going to say clearly, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled. So So if you look in these pages, you'll see 4 different ways of explaining this ayin, the bittul of the oir, due to its dveikus and atzmus. Okay? So, we start with ha'aleph, the first way. So you can mark it if you like, and then you'll see. So here's the first way to explain. Again, lahavin bekame fanim be'in ha'bittul. We're going to understand this ayin that's in the oir in several ways. Okay, the first way is the liyese bebchinas dveikus b'mkere, being, as we just said, that it's attached b'mkere in its source. Harinirgish b'mkere, it feels its source. He's actually going to begin, I see, from the bottom up. He's not going to talk the highest level of bittul. He's going to talk now the lower level and move away up. I'm almost sure that's the way he's going here. I just want to see. Yeah, I believe he's going from the bottom up. Yeah. So all the ways it's an ayin be'etzem, as he said in the opening statement, but in that itself, there's these levels. So here is because he's attached, therefore he feels the source. Therefore, this itself, through this itself, mizbatel ba'atzme. This oir is mizbatel, is nullified within itself. In a state of not feeling any standing, any value, any significance. Ukamoy keser elyon, like when we make the statement keser elyon, uchamhu kodem ilus ha'ilus. So the expression is, the full expression is keser elyon tzachum etzuchtzach. We learned about this earlier. So the expression is interesting. Ucham is the word dark. It's blackened, it's darkened before ilus ha'ilus, the cause of all causes. Now keser, we all know, is a very high level. Keser. And yet, compared to its source of sources, ilus ha'ilus means the source of sources, it's darkened, like a flame that's dark in the light of the sun. The pirush ucham, who shachrus. It's shachrus from the word darkness. She'en b'chinas er klal. It's not at all er. But we know that keser is the highest level of er. The answer is, because it feels its source, ilus ha'ilus, the cause of causes, it completely becomes nullified in presence of its source. Just for the record, if you like, in the Zohar, he asks a question. It says that when Yaakov had the wrestling with the angel, so it said, Ad aleis hashachar, until the morning, till the dawn. Now we use aleis hashachar all the time. As the Zohar, what means aleis hashachar? What do you mean aleis? Why is the shachar rising? You should say the dawn is breaking. What's the word aleis? She says, because the word shachar is not shachar, is from the word morning, shachar from the word darkness. Aleis hashachar means because the darkness rises as the dawn breaks. So the real taich of aleis hashachar means the rise of the darkness basically being removed. It's really taiches aleis hashachar. So just mentioning, because many people think the word shachar or shacharis means morning. It's true, it's in the morning, it happens in the morning, but its meaning is that
the pshat is that it's morning, but you say the Zohar is explaining it in a different way.
Yeah, but it happened. That's what makes morning, when the night leaves.
That's
what he says. That's what he types. Like here, shachrus, from the word darkness.
This naga is not shrago b'ti aromai mehane. The ucham hu legabi iras ha'ilus. That's not shrago b'ti.
I just gave an example. I didn't mean necessarily exactly that level. I just meant to say that in the being that it feels its source, it darkens. It's not experience of light. U'kamoy kol nuhurayin mischash choyin kamei. All the lights become darkened, are darkened kamei before him. U'kamoy, here he goes. U'kamoy shraga betira, like a flame. Betira is this in sunlight. Betira means in the day. in the etzem of the daylight, the power of the daylight. Shem is
The bright.
Huh?
The bright.
The brightness,
Bright
yeah.
light.
Yeah. Shem is batl er aner legabe er hashemesh. That the light of the flame is nullified in comparison to the light of the sun. So in other words, this level of bittul is dveik. Yes, the air is attached to its source, but the focus is on that it feels its source. Since it feels its source, it feels nothing. It's like when you're standing in front of, as great a teacher you may be, as a great personality, but you're standing in front of your master teacher, your Rebbe, you feel like I'm nobody.
This
Not
is what
in a
I don't
negative
understand.
way.
Shrago B'Tiaro does not feel, their candle does not feel the big light. Here he said it because to feel.
First of all, how do you know it feels what doesn't feel? The point here is not the feeling. The point is that's what happens to it. Yeah. So the bottom line is the neir is bottle gabe the shemesh. We're not talking here whether it has a hergish or not. The bottom line is that its bittul is due to the presence of its source. Fine. U'kamoy hakoten legabe godel. Like a smaller person, a person's smaller stature in comparison to someone greater. She'ein b'chinas tfisas mokem ba'atzmei. That when he feels his presence, when he's in his presence, doesn't feel any significance. You know, who am I in comparison? Again, this is not a negative thing. This is not like, oh, shiflish shel sheker, a person feels I'm nobody. It means you're in the presence of something of that greatness that your state of being is completely bottled to it. Now he goes back after saying, so he gave here, let's see how many things he said here. He said he brought Keser Elyon, he brought Kol Nuhurayim Ischashchoyin, and he brought the Shraga Betira and Kotten Lagabe Gadol. He brought 4 different elements to this discussion. One, that's like Keser Elyon, that's dark before the source of sources. 2, that all the lights are darkened before him. 3, like the flame in the light of the sun, or the bright light of the sun. And 4, the Kotten Lagabe the Gadol. I'm just pointing out, he said these 4 things. Now he's going to go back to the nimshal, to the moral. And the same thing is with the light, the energy that's attached. Attached to its source, in the essence, due to its feeling, its atzmos, the core essence, he becomes mizbatel, completely nullified within himself, does not feel any value and significance of his own. Okay, Vagam, now he continues to qualify. Vagam, and even though Shabitl of the head that tfisas mokum shaykh legab gili he's now going to qualify that this level, you don't need to have davik be'etzem and atzmus. This level exists throughout so many different ways you can explain it. So he's going to explain now, qualify what exactly he means here. He says, even though, agam, that this bitl headed with shach legabe gili this is also shach legabe gili meaning a state where the light is revealed. Ukamoy legabe hashemesh. Like when we say, compared to the light of the sun, Shebegili mizbatel iraner. Notice we're not talking here about etzema air that doesn't have any light. You're talking about even a state of revealed light. Take the sun is shining, and compared to this light, the bright sunshine, the flame is bottled. We'll soon see where he's going with this. Now he used the word chacham, not just cotton and gadol. Like a chacham, a wise person, but he's on a lower stature in wisdom compared to a greater stature, higher stature of wisdom. This bittul of a lower chacham compared to a greater chacham is only dafka when he's aware of the afla, the wonder, the grandeur, the awesomeness of the chachma. Then he's batel. So in other words, awareness is part of the process here. Maybe that's what he's about learning now. Awareness. Maybe that's what he wants to talk about. Hergish. That you feel it. Okay, let's see. I don't want to draw any conclusions till we read the whole piece. Oz mizbat legabe. Shari'im. Below it says Eini Yadeya. The word Eini is missing. Shari'im Eini Yadeya klal. If the chacham katan, if the lower stature wise person is not at all aware of aflas chachmasei, of the wonder of the wisdom of the greater chacham, wise one, Einim is batal klal. He won't be nullified at all. Kim kashe yadei aflas v'gdedel chachmasei. It's only when he knows and is aware. Just because you're sitting at a table learning and a big chacham walks in, how do you know he's a chacham gadol? If he didn't know, he wouldn't be batal, but only if you're aware that he's a chacham gadol. Then you become nullified in sensing, look where I stand, I have no standing compared to this chacham. Okay, this is all hagam. We'll soon see again where he's going with this. So it's due only when he's aware. In other words, it's not just due to his attachment, the dveikus is due to his being aware. Fine. That's basically what he just said. And same thing is above. The Keser Elyon Uchamhu, that when we say Keser Elyon is dark, this is specifically Kodem Ilas Ha'Ilas. Zeu Kodem Ilas Ha'Ilas. You don't just say Keser Elyon is dark. You say the end of the phrase. Keser Elyon Uchamhu Legabe Ilas Ha'Ilas. Or Uchamhu Kodem, Kodem Ilas Ha'Ilas. You say it in context. Kodem Ilas Ha'Ilas. In the presence of the cause of causes, it's dark. In general, this refers to the level of the kav. Okay, he's now qualifying which level of the kav is. That ilis ha'ilis, he's referring to the kav, and that's a revelation of light. So when Keser Elyon senses that, in its presence on it, senses it, that's why it's dark. So now he's going to ask, this is now his question. But Atzmus is higher than Gili. So how can you say the same statement? In other words, the idea of Hedet Tfisas Mokim, this idea that you don't have standing or not significant, is a greater light compared to a lower light compared to a greater light. But Atzmus is not a light. It's not any form of revelation. So how do we say compared to Atzmus is Batel Mitzad, is feeling it's greater? It's not a greater light. It's not a level of light. That's what he started by saying Hagam, but it's clearly a question because he's going to say Yesh Leimer. Everybody understands the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in other words, basically saying Atzmus is not a level of Gili. It's not even, you could say, like would you say, for example, a 2-year-old baby, a 1-day-old baby is Batel Legabi a Chacham Gadol. It's not in the same Geder B'chlal. I'm just using it as an example. It's not an exact example. You could say a Chacham Katan and a Chacham Gadol, a smaller light, a greater light. There's Hedet Tfisas Mokim. But if you're in the presence of Atzmus B'chlal not in that. It's not in your realm. It's like completely not. It's like what the Alter Rebbe says, to say that Chachma you can't touch with your hands. Anyone who says that is going to be laughed at. They're not even in the same category. I believe this is what he's saying, but if I'm qualifying it because I'm not 100% positive. But it sounds like that's what he's saying here.
That's why there's so much people that don't believe in God. Just exactly this problem.
Yeah. But I don't think they believe in air either. Okay. So he says now, Yesh Lamer. So Yesh Lamer. I want to just see one thing, if you don't mind. I want to see how Tzadik Dalet handles this piece here. I'm just peeking ahead here. Oh, wow. He has a lot to say on this. Okay. Thought so. Yeah, he makes it very clear. The question is, how can you say headed tfisas mokim on oir legaba atzmus? Headed tfisas mokim seems to be only applicable oir legaba oir, basically. One light compared to what we just said. He says that very explicitly here.
That's why we talk about Orain Sof a lot, because we can't quite talk about Orain Sof.
Okay, let's see what he's going to say here. It's an interesting question. Okay, so he says like this. Yesh Leimer. The klolos b'chinas ha'er min ha'atzmus. The general level of air coming from atzmus. Ein zeh b'chinas richuk min ha'atzmus. Oh, wow. Okay. It's not what we call richuk, that it's distant from atzmus. Now, obviously, we need to explain what this means. Then we learn that that atzmus is beyond everything. Not what difference does it make? Light, no light. So he says, even though atzmus is not, you can't call it a source for light, right? You can only say air emerges from atzmus. It comes from atzmus. In other words, you can't call atzmus like a sun is a source for sunlight. You can't say atzmus is like a sun to light. Atzmus is beyond. And from nimsa min atzmus, atzmus chooses, so to speak, that light emerges from him. So you say it emerges, not that he is a source for it. Okay? Now it doesn't emerge automatically, obviously. Atzmus has to want it, but there's no word rotz in there. So we say nimsa min atzmus. So what are you telling me that it's not rachik? It is. It's completely done in the same category. It's not like sunlight and sun are close to each other. Sunlight is not the sun, but they have much in common. The sun was created to give off light. Atzmus is not there to give light. So, but nevertheless, you say, it goes on, so not only is it not a source, Eir is also be'enarech. It's infinitely distant from Atzmus. Because it's only a reflection. It's only light that's not the etzem at all. The rule is a reflection Ha'ara is infinitely distant at all, altogether distant from an etzem. The truth is, you could say that even on sunlight and sun, but you can't say that on the first part. So he said two things. One is, atzmus is not a mocker for Eir. Now he's saying an Eir is infinitely distant from the source. The parenthesis he adds, okay, so this is not as, I think this is not as distant as the first point he made, but it's still distant. Because a reflection is not a mahuz davar. When you say something's a reflection, it doesn't have personality. It's a reflection of something else. It's like saying a shadow. Someone's shadow. Would you say the shadow has substance? No, it's a shadow of a person. Same thing, light is a reflection of something else. And etzem, the atzmu mahuz davar, and atzmi is a mahuz davar. So the truth is, you could say that about sun and sunlight too. The sun is an atzmi, sunlight is ha'ara. But you can't say point number one on the sun, which is that it's nimtza mimenu, because the sun is absolutely a mocker for Eir. Okay, so he said two things. He's still going on to, this is all to explain, he first started that Eir is not atzmus, but he said, 1 second, we know that atzmus is completely distant from Eir. So he's qualifying that, and he's going to go back and forth. So just bear through. Let's bear through this. Ubefrat, and another point, and ubefrat, and specifically, especially, now he's qualifying, and this is even more so with atzmus. Even an etzem like the sun is also infinitely distant from sunlight in the context of etzem and reflection. But especially atzmus, that's moved to be'erech legamri min ha'er. That's completely removed from air. Not even like the sun. I'm just using that as an example.
In
Ad
other
shelegabe atzmus.
words, we can't even say it's an aura. That's the point, I think.
Yeah. He's going to say further. Ad shelegabe atzmus, now he's adding in the parentheses. To the point, to the extent that compared to atzmus, hine er einagam gili ha'atzmus. To that extent that it's so distant from air, that the air, you can't call it a gili, a revelation of atzmus. The b'chinas atzmus mamish eina baba air. Because atzmus itself, what makes atzmus unique as atzmus, does not come into the air. He's now going to say it in Yiddish. The Lashon Yiddish. Was atzmus is vet nit aragetragen in air. What atzmus is does not get carried over into air. Like it says elsewhere, and it was also explained earlier, right? It was explained earlier. Let me just explain what that means. At the same time, if you remember, it says that air does carry the power of atzmus, but not what atzmus is. It's the power of atzmus. For example, atzmus is going to create. Creation can only be done by atzmus. Nothing else can create except hu levade bekeche v'yechalta. He's the only one that has the power and the capacity to create. But that creative power he uses through his instrument called air. So what does air do? Does air tell us what atzmus is, or is it carrying the power of atzmus? That's a big difference. What he's saying is air does not reveal what atzmus really is on its own. Now, does it tell us things about atzmus? Yes, of course it reveals us. But to say that air, these words he uses, that atzmus, was is, was atzmus is the actual identity of atzmus is not carried in air, because air is at the end of the day a reflection and does not tell us, for example, mitziusim atzmuse. That would be an example of what atzmus is. Atzmus is an existence that comes from within himself. You know who tells us that? The yesh. Air can't tell us that because air does have a source. So air can't tell us that mitzusim atzmuse. What you could say is that once there's a yesh, so the air now reveals to us through the yesh that atzmus has the power of mitzusim atzmuse. So air, for example, does not tell us that God creates yesh ma'ayin. Once there's a yesh, air is the carrier of that power. So that's a big distinction, that's a big difference than saying that air reveals what atzmus is.
Oir einoi giloi atzmus. That's what he said. The b'chinas atzmus.
I just explained what that means.
You explained it very well.
But listen, we know what it says here. I tried to explain what it means. So I just explained that. Okay. So now he says, V'im kain ha'er, so based on all this, so he said a few things. That atzmus is not a source for air. Atzmus, etzem, and ha'ara are infinitely distant. Especially atzmus, completely beyond air, and finally air does not reveal what atzmus actually is. So he says, im kain ha'eru be'ena rech legamri legaba atzmus.
So why is it called oil?
We didn't finish the discussion. Remember, this is all im hayes. He said air does not come in a form of richuk. We didn't finish it. He's only the first half of the discussion. And it's still not finished. There's more to go here. So he says like this now. So what we're stating now is, he started by saying, remember, he has a question here. The question here is, how could you say er and atzmus, the concept of not tfisas mokim? You can only say that by er and a greater er. So to answer that, he said that Eir from Atzmus does not come with the b'chinas b'derech richuk. But he's qualifying. What does that mean? We're just establishing now Eir is infinitely distant from Atzmus. So we have a question within a question here. I'll explain it all, but just bear with it. We're not far from finished here. Now he's going to continue further to explain this Ein Arech. This is why I learned the end of the Maimer and Tzadik Daled, because of these few lines here. He says, V'zeh inyan Ein Arech l'cha be'elam hazeh. And this is why we say, this is the inyan where we say, Ein Arech be'elam hazeh. Only Elam Hazeh teaches us the Ein Arech, the infinite distance of Atzmus. Shemesavas hayesh anu yedim Ein Arech, inyan Ein Arech. From the creation of the Yesh, we learn the Ein Arech, the infinite distance. In other words, from Eir itself, you wouldn't know how distant Atzmus is from everything. Because Eir is a revealer, so you could say maybe Eir is revealing like the sun, and there's some relationship. So Ein Arech we learn only from the Yesh. U'kamoshen is barley il, like we discussed earlier, explained earlier, Dibra Maskel B'Chedesh. In the Maimer B'Chedesh Ashvi, which is the previous Maimer. Yeah. V'al yidei zeh, and through this, anu yedim, we know, Shegama Eru Be'Ein Arech. Yesh teaches us that also the Eir is Ein Arech. In other words, if you only saw Eir Ein Sof, you wouldn't know what it's reflecting. Maybe you'd say this, its source is like the sun. It's the Yesh that teaches us that God created a Yesh completely, not a Yesh does not reflect Atzmus. Doesn't reveal anything. It teaches us the Ein Arech, and that teaches us that Eir is also Ein Arech l'gabe Atzmus. The Me'er Levad, from light itself, lo yinu yedim Ein Arech. From light itself, we would not have known the idea of infinite distance. Why? Eir could also come when there's no Atzmus involved. Like I said, Eir HaShemesh, light of the sun. And Eir on its own, if we didn't know better, has some commensurate, some relationship, some proportionate relationship with its source. It's only from the Metzias HaYesh that God created a Yesh which has no identity, that does not indicate on any source. On a Yedim Inyan Ein Arech. After from the Yesh, we know the Ein Arech, as I said, we learned earlier. We learned this actually, it says in B'Chedesh, I think we learned it in Tzadik Dal, it was at length, this idea. Okay. So we're still in the middle of a question upon a question within an answer, which we're still in the middle of. Okay.
So how does that teach us? How does that teach us that the R is also Bein Arech l'gabe Atzmus?
Because once you know Atzmus can create a Yesh, then you realize that Atzmus is not a sun. Because a sun can only create light. A sun can't create a Yesh. So that teaches us that even the light of the Atzmus can't be really reflective of the source. It's teaching us the reality of the source. So without Yesh, you could say there's like a sun, and the sun gives off light. But when you suddenly see the sun, let's say, produce a human being or an elephant, you have to say, 1 second, the source is not just light. So that tells you that the light of the sun doesn't reveal what the essence of the source really is. Okay.
Good, that was helpful. Yeah.
One second. No, I skipped the line. Sorry. Okay, he's explaining why tafka the yesh, because in order for there to be a yesh, that can only come from Atzmus, who himself is a yesh. Commission is barley il dibra maskel ze'ayim, like it was explained earlier in the first Rosh Hashanah Maimon, ze'ayim, 2 Maimorim back. There he basically said what he says in Ageres HaKedesh, that the only way to create a yesh that does not indicate and does not relate to any source has to be Mitziusim Atzmusi that has no source. That was one of the points. There's more points to it, but I'm not going to go into it right now. But the point is, a yesh tells you that Atzmus is not a source of things, because the yesh has nothing in common with Atzmus. Oyer has a lot in common because it's a revelatory force. Yesh is a concealing element. Okay.
But Atmos itself has no, is not a Gili force, and I just don't understand the last statement you made.
Well, we're in the middle of it. We're still in the middle of talking about this. So, Oyer reveals that there's a source for light, correct?
Yes, yes.
And that source you would identify as being a source of light, unless you know better. A yesh does not indicate on a source of light, because yesh is not a revealing light. Yesh tells you that whatever put it here must be a completely different type of reality. As I said, the sun cannot create a yesh.
I think I got it.
Okay, and from this we know, we also know now that air comes from Atzmus, and it's completely apart, infinitely apart from Atzmus. And he goes even further now. And mamish, literally, just as the yesh is infinitely distant from its source, also air is be'en arech. So basically, air and yesh are equal in the eyes of Atzmus.
Yeah, so we can, whatever we learn from this world, we can learn from Aura too. So why do we have to bother saying we only know it from this world?
Because Ur can only reveal that there's a source of light. You don't know ein arech from Ur. How would you know? Maybe it's like the sun and sunlight.
Is it? Yeah, no, it's not like that. But once we know that Aura,
Once we know there's a yesh, now we know that Ur is also be'en arech to Atzmus. Exactly. That's exactly what he's saying.
we have to learn it afterwards. Gotcha.
Okay. Now he's going to say, however, with all this, it's still not the same. Mekol mokim. Nevertheless, mitziyuse min ha'atzmus, the mitziyus of Ur from Atzmus, eine bederech ein arech k'mei mitziyus hayesh. So though in reality, Ur and Yesh are both infinitely distant from Atzmus, but the way Ur emanates from Atzmus is different than the way Yesh emanates or is created from Atzmus. Because an Ur is not bederech ein arech. God did not create it in the form of ein arech. So he's distinguishing here between the actual reality of Ur and the way Ur is formed and shaped and emanates. The Masha Atzmus nikra beta, because when we say Atzmus is called the beta, creator, that mitis inyan habriya v'yisavasum in Atzmus, Commission is bar il, that the true power of creation is from Atzmus. When you say God is a creator of something that does not have a source, does not have a direct link to its source, that is a creation in form of ein arech. That's a leap. It's very clear that the creator and the creation have nothing in common in personality. We cannot create, and only God can create. Not only, in other words, that a yesh is ein arech to the creator, but the hisavas itself, the way it was done, the process. Key thing here is the word process. Keep that in mind. The process is also ein arech. It's a leap. God didn't make a yesh in a progressive, logical way. It's a leap to create something. Besides the fact that the yesh itself is infinitely distant, next page, 1156. So besides the yesh being infinitely distant, the process is also from a distance. Even though we learned earlier that it's Keich HaPoel B'nifl, God applies himself, but that's already lower levels of Ur. The actual power of creation is infinitely distant, and therefore the process of the creative process has an element of distance, an infinite distance. It also has an element of him applying himself and engaging and investing the Eir into the creation. We'll talk about that more later. I just wanted to qualify. The Eir is infinitely distant, but the process, that's not a leap. Eir and Atzmus is not a leap, even though Eir is not Atzmus and completely infinitely distant. The Eir who einarech klal legabe Atzmus. Eir is einarech. Eir itself is infinitely distant from Atzmus. Avli savuse eina b'derech einarech. The way God emanated it, it's not through a leap. The ime yesh ein ze b'chinas kiruv ha'atzmus. Even though you can't call it kiruv ha'atzmus because there's that infinite distance, b'kol mokem eina gam kein b'derech einarech. Nevertheless, it's also not in a form of a process that's einarech. Why? Because Eir is a gilui. When God creates gilui, gilui by definition means it reveals something. So it doesn't reveal all of Atzmus. We know that. It also is completely infinitely distant. But Eir, its identity tells you there's a God. The identity of the Yesh does not tell you there's a God, meaning in any revealed way. It has to come through our own deduction. Eir, by definition, is a revealer. So therefore, revelation, by definition, means it is not completely apart. So sunlight tells you there's a sun. Light tells you there's Atzmus. Doesn't tell you about the Einarech of Atzmus. That the Yesh tells you. But it does tell you, I have a source. The Yesh, we can walk around and not say, I don't feel a source, I don't feel anything. The Eir does not have that luxury. The Eir does not have that identity. In other words, the Atzmus that's beyond everything essentially created two tracks. Some things that would reveal that there's a source, and some things that would not reveal. The not reveal actually paradoxically teach us more about the source, about the nature, the personality of Atzmus. But the Eir teaches us something. It reveals things. Now we discussed this at length a while back, what the mile of Eir is, because without Eir you don't have Gili. It would be like the example would be, imagine we were only given mitzvahs and no Torah. God says, here are the mitzvahs to do. He finds some way to communicate to us. He wants you to put on tefillin and eat kosher and Shabbos and Yom Tov and Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, etc. And that's it. There's no Torah Eir. You don't know why you do mitzvahs. You don't know how to learn about it. It's commands of a master to a servant. What would we have? We know there's a master. He's giving us these commands, but we'd have nothing about what would we know about this master? There would be nothing to know. It would be like the mile of a Baal Tshuva over a tzaddik. So Baal Tshuva has a more atzmizdik connection to the source, but a tzaddik has a more revealed connection, and you really want both. So to say that the etzem and neshama is connected to the etzem of God, we learn on Yom Kippur, the etzem of the soul is connected to etzem. That's it. And someone doesn't do any aveda and doesn't daven and doesn't learn. So what you'll have is an etzem to etzem, but it'll never be giluyim. It'll never be something you can relate to. So Eir creates that you can relate to it. Bottom line is Eir and Yesh work hand in hand to have a relationship with Atzmus. Eir is the revelatory part, the internalization, the revealing, the gilui, and Yesh is the Atzmizdika part. And we learned this in Tzadik Dalet more at length, the mile of each one, but that's what he's essentially saying here. That Eir is infinitely distant. And you can't call it kiru for that reason. But its way of emanation is a way of revealing, not a way of concealing. But we don't know everything about Atzmus until you have the Yesh. You don't know what Atzmus is like until you have the Yesh. But that doesn't mean you don't know there's a source. It does reveal a source. It just doesn't reveal on its own what the source is truly like. That's essentially what he's saying. That Eir and Yesh, even though they're fundamentally equal in the eyes of Atzmus, but they're not similar in the way they present and the way they express. That's what he's saying here. And therefore, he's more to say and explain on this, but therefore, he's going to come to conclude that that's why you could say that Eir is not Tfisas Mokim Legaba Atzmus, even though Atzmus is completely beyond. That's where he's going to lead to. Okay. So let's stop here at the top of 1156.